The Constitutional Accountability Center has done an amazing work analyzing corporate influence on the Supreme Court and how that has helped influence some of the decisions that have come out of the court. They filed a very important amicus brief in Citizens United itself, have published a piece called A Capitalist Joker. And so, I'd love, Elizabeth, for you to comment a little bit about what Adam has said in terms of some of the issues that we need to think about as we draft a 28th Amendment. But what comes to mind for you from analyzing sort of corporate power in the Supreme Court and what corporations have been able to accomplish as there something else to add to the kind of understanding of how we would actually get at the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, all of you, for being here on this Sunday morning. Thank you, Jeff and American Promise, for inviting me, and thank you for the coffee. So I can actually be awake and talk about this with the proper enthusiasm that it requires. So, Caroline, I think your question is great. When we at Constitutional Accountability Center looked at this issue when we were filing our briefs in Citizens United, it's very clear that the Constitution allows the government, in fact, encourages the government to regulate corporations in a different way than natural persons. A lot of the decisions that Adam talked about, going back to the founding, focused on corporations as a creature of the state, very distinct from natural persons with inherent, inalienable rights of personhood, of conscience. And so corporations in the founding era had certain rights under the Constitution that were much more limitations on what the government could do as opposed to rights of conscience. And this was really true going up through through the Reconstruction. And even afterward, there were still some limitations that were recognized. I think a perfect example of this is the Hale v. Henkel case, where this was a criminal case, and as Adam says, we should be nuanced in the way we think about this, because we don't want to have the government have unlimited power, appropriate power, but not unlimited. So in that case, when this corporation was subject to a criminal subpoena, they couldn't claim the right against self-incrimination, because that's really a personal right, a right of conscience that goes back to the founding era concerns about taking oaths and this very rich history of you should not be as a person forced to testify against yourself. And because corporations are artificial entities of the state, they couldn't claim that right of conscience. However, they could claim a constitutional right under the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures, which is really more a limitation on what the government can do in its governmental activities. So I think that's a nice balance of what we saw from the founding up until the modern Supreme Court era, of balancing the ways in which we properly allow corporations to claim constitutional protections of property rights under the Contracts Clause, and to enforce government structural limitations, checks on government power, but not giving them individual rights of conscience and of individual personhood, like free speech, or the idea, I think, to the founders that you could have the Hobby Lobby type rights for corporations that they, I've never looked across the pew at church and seen ExxonMobil kneeling next to me. So the idea that, you could have a corporation claim these religious beliefs is crazy. But so I think that's how, when we looked at Citizens United, when it was being litigated, there's this rich history going back to the founding of government being able to regulate corporations. And certainly when it comes to democracy, there should be that limitation. And we are, in our organization, kind of progressive originalists. We have all these conservative originalists on the court. Of course they were gonna follow the text and history of the Constitution. Well, no. So, we saw the result. And then after Citizens United, I have to say, personally, I was a little ambivalent at first about the prospect of amending the Constitution, because the Supreme Court got it wrong. There was nothing wrong with the Constitution. The Supreme Court majority in Citizens United got it wrong. So I was thinking, this was back in those hopeful years where maybe we were going to have a progressive nominee to the Supreme Court come next. No, we thought, that majority got it wrong. So let's focus on getting a Supreme Court that will get it right. But I think we're in a moment now where, as Caroline said, we must look at the hard work of amending the Constitution. Because, as you noted, we have several times had we the people have to reclaim our charter and tell the Supreme Court that they got it wrong and amend the Constitution to say that that's true. So that, I think, is the project now. And I think that it's very inspiring to see all of the citizen leaders. You know, we just heard a few moments ago about movements and the people who make change happen. And that is the story of the progressive arc of the Constitution, which has been amended to be more inclusive, more democratic. And so I think that your movement, this movement, is part of that arc of constitutional progress.